Hey guys, it's Lohpally here with another video, and today we're going to be talking about 8.23 tier list for our top 5 supports. So, most notable things that happened in this patch were mostly the changes to the turrets, where they now have platings that you can break for extra gold, and changes to a couple of rune setups, including being able to now pick your stats specifically. Especially also buffs to things like Dark Harvest have made it a really strong laning phase rune rather than something that you farm with. So, we'll just jump right into number 5, which is going to be Alistar. Since a lot of people are playing a lot of weird stuff bottom lane right now, including mages and bruisers bot lane, Alistar comes in at number 5 as just a stable pick that gives you both engage and disengage for any laner that you're playing with, plus reliable crowd control, and he's overall just tanky. He also has a reasonable amount of sustain in his passive for the laning phase, so he doesn't get pushed out in too many of the bad matchups that maybe harass you a little bit. So we'll just jump right into the rune setup. So runes are a little bit different than before. Remember, you get to actually pick your primary stats, which impacts some of the rune setups that you can run on some of the champions. But coming in for Alistar, we're going to be using a pretty standardized page. Once again, you're going to be running Aftershock on the top, and then the first tree you're going to most likely run Demolish. And the reason for this is his Font of Life's numbers are incredibly low, and Shield Bash you don't really have any way to optimally give yourself a shield as something like Alistar. So Demolish pretty much just comes in as this, because being able to break plates in the early stages and front load a lot of damage is really, really valuable. Plus, the charge time is only 3 seconds now, so it's received a significant buff in terms of its activation and the ability to like proc it and get a lot of gold in your lane, especially when you're winning. Alistar also does really well because they did actually buff the damage that turrets deal in the early stages. He's still incredibly tanky, especially with his ultimate, he can still turret dive people, which is incredibly valuable. After that, we come into the second tree with Conditioning, Second Wind, and Bone Plating. For the most part, I've just been predominantly running Second Wind in every matchup, even if the matchup isn't too poke-oriented. I found that Bone Plating actually pops off too fast, since the duration is 1.5 seconds. It just isn't really that valuable to me in laning phase, especially. Since laning phase is so mattersome in most games, and 5v5 is just kind of a secondary afterthought for your rune setups, I just like running Second Wind. That way if I ever get hit with any spells, it's a really easy way to recover. Plus in the mid game it's actually not too bad, and in team fights it scales up because it's always missing health. After that, one thing to note is they actually retuned Overgrowth to actually give you a flat amount of health and then a bonus percentage health after you've CS'd a lot, around 120 minions. Since Alistar is a champion that runs Relic and wants to be around minions that are dying, I actually started running Overgrowth quite often, and it gives between about 100 to 250 HP depending on the length of the game. I think that's pretty reasonable for the bottom tier tree, since I didn't really like Unflinching since your ultimate can remove CC, and Revitalize was just kind of what I was running because I couldn't figure out anything else that was worth my time. After that, for Alistar, for the most part, I've just been running Inspiration Secondary, regardless of the stat template changes, and running Hextech Flash. That way you can just make combos over walls and terrain, even if your Flash is on cooldown. And then bouncing between Biscuit Delivery or Minion Dematerializer, depending on what lane I am, making sure that I can secure those cannons. So next we get into the stat template right now. So in the first tree, the offense tree, you have the option between 10% or 1 to 10% CDR or 9% attack speed. As of lately, I've actually been running the 9% attack speed rather than the CDR, and the reason for that is 10% CDR at level 18 just requires too many levels for most cases, and it's really easy for you to find CDR on most of your builds. So I just like the extra attack speed, that way I can wind up and get the auto attack off a lot easier on Alistar passive. After that, pretty much your flex and defense are just mostly predicated on what matchups you're playing against. If the enemy AD carry doesn't have a mage DPS bot lane, I recommend just running 5 armor on both of these. The reason why it's more valuable than maybe something like the health is because you want to be mitigating as much damage as possible. That way your second wind can actually be more valuable, and things like biscuits and any recovery elements. You want to get as much mitigation as possible. The health really isn't that valuable, and its numbers are pretty bad for the early stages of laning phase, which is what you want to focus your runes on. If in the case that I was against something like a Brand or a Velkoz, something that does a lot of magic damage, then I just switch over both runes to magic resist instead. Alright, So that's pretty much, and going into itemization for the most part on Alistar, it's pretty much just the same. You're going to get your relic shield and upgrade to the tier 3 relic. That way you can get the 10% CDR and the extra stack, so you can be generating gold a lot and getting your Moby boots. After that, we're just going to be looking at Zeeks in pretty much all cases, just so that you can AoE slow people down. In case you're with something like a mage though, then maybe a locket is more valuable as your first item. Usually my 3 items in some kind of semblance of order is Zeeks, Knight's Vow, and Locket. After that, the world's kind of your oyster, and you can kind of build whatever you need in terms of mitigation or anything like that. But these items are going to be the key things that you want to have, just so you can pair them up with your AD carry or strong teammate, so you can power them up and utilize them for extra damage mitigation. So, jumping into number 4 afterwards is Leona. As stated before, Dark Harvest has actually been significantly overtuned currently, and so having champions that are tanky that can go in and absorb the brute front of damage is always really good. Whenever I like playing against mages, usually Leona is one of my first go-tos, just because of the fact that she does a lot of the damage for you, and that once she hits level 6, her ultimate range really allows her to engage from really far away, and especially mages that are mobile and very squishy, it's really easy for her to jump on them. So we'll just jump into the runes, and it's going to look a lot like Alistar for most cases for this champion, which will be running Aftershock once again, and for the most part running Demolish. After that, I usually still continue to take Second Wind and Overgrowth. And then for the Inspiration Tree, Hextech Flash and Minion Dematerializer or Biscuits is pretty much what I'm predominantly running. You can run different variants for your secondaries depending on whether or not you're comfortable with avoiding poke, but this is the most stable rune page I feel like with dealing with pretty much all matchups. You can make a case for something like maybe Domination and trying to run Sudden Impact, but you will be opting into a more all-in-y kind of situation where you won't have nearly as much utility or recovery if you do get poked out. After that, it's pretty much the same situation where you're looking at your offense tree, and in this case, I actually particularly like the Adaptive Force. The reason for this is your Q is an actual auto reset, so in optimal trades, actually you Zenith Blade onto a player, you auto Q auto, which means you're getting 3 auto attacks off just in that window, and having the extra AD actually feels incredibly good. Once again, kind of just explaining why I don't like the 1 to 10% CDR. Just takes too long to get basically any of the CDR. And if you're really starving for that last 10%, you can always build something that'll give it to you, since most of the items that you'll be building on this champion give you CDR. After that, once again, just the same thing as Alistar. You're just kind of going between whether or not you're running 5 armor on both of them or 6 MR on both of them, depending on whether or not there's a mage DPSer in bot lane. If there's only physical damage dealers, then you just want to run armor. So, build path is going to look exactly like Alistar, where you're going to be upgrading your Sightstone to tier 3 for the CDR, and getting your hands on Mobies most likely. After that, you'll be looking to build Zeeks, Locket, and Knight's Vow once again. Depending on what order is based on whether or not you're laning with an AD carry. If you're snowballing, if there's a lot of magic AoE damage, then you might opt into a Locket a lot earlier. If there's a lot of focus damage on maybe a carry that's really powerful, then you'll want to get a Knight's Vow early. But for the most part, I found myself going Zeeks, and then just consciously choosing between Knight's Vow and Locket based on whether or not they're indexed on a lot of magic damage or physical damage. We're going into number 3 now, which is going to be Zyra. Now, the reason why Zyra has started to come in as a really powerful pick is mostly just due to the fact that there's a new rune change, which is Dark Harvest. For those who don't know, to explain it really quickly, it procs off of any damage that you deal once the player is under 50% damage, and then it harvests a soul and increases the Dark Harvest for the rest of the game. On top of that, Dark Harvest has an AD and AP ratio, and it resets on takedown after 1.5 seconds, which is really where a lot of the power is on the champion. It's easy to proc, and it has reset capabilities, which means that in a game state where games can snowball out of control very quickly, this is a very, very potent rune. So we're going to be running this. After that, you're just going to look between Cheap Shot and Taste Their Blood based on your matchup. I like Taste Their Blood if I feel like I'm going to get poked a lot and I want to be able to recover HP. Maybe you're against a long-range champion like Zyra, Velkoz, Misfortune Support, or maybe you're against Ash. Anything that's poking you a lot, I really like Taste for Blood just to kind of neutralize some of the poke elements since it can proc off your plants. If not, and you're maybe against a melee champion, maybe you're against a Braum, an Alistar, Leona, etc., then Cheap Shot's going to be the way to go just because it's really easy to proc and it cooldown is very short. After that, for the most part, I've been running Zombie Ward, but I've also seen a lot of people starting to take Eyeball Collection just for the extra AP. This is mostly a personal preference thing, whether you care more about vision control or damage in the lane. If you care about damage, take Eyeball Collector. If you value vision a bit more, though, take Zombie Ward. And then after that, since I'm normally building Sorcerer Shoes on Zyra, so I don't have Moby Boots, I've been a big fan of just taking Relentless Hunter for the extra movement speed out of combat, just so I can navigate the map a little bit easier. After that, we go into the secondary rune setups, which I've been predominantly taking Mana Flow Band and Absolute Focus from the Sorcery Tree. This just gives you the most amount of AP, and it will make sure that you're not running out of mana in lane. After that, since you're a champion that just predominantly pokes, you're going to be running both Adaptive Force on your offense and your flex. After that, you kind of just want to choose between armor and MR, once again, for whether or not there's only an AD carry doing damage with like a traditional support, or if there's a lot of magic damage, like something like a Brand or a Velkoz. So that's just kind of your conscious choice based on that. For itemization for a champion like Zyra, it's pretty much always been the standard, which is get Liandry's, get a Rylai's, and then a Void Staff after that. Your last item is just basically whatever you want it to be. If there's a lot of assassins, maybe you can mix in Azonias before one of the items or after one of the items. That's completely fine. If I'm just going for pure damage, then a lot of times I'll just go Death Cap my last item. If I'm poking a lot, then maybe my last item's the Ludens for just extra CDR and poke like that. Other than that, it's just kind of whatever you want for your fourth item. Just make sure that it gives you a lot of AP. Alright, so we'll be jumping into number 2 now, which is going to be Velkoz. The reason why Velkoz is a little bit higher than champion like Zyra is just because of the fact that his spells reach a little bit longer. And in a scenario where everyone is incredibly squishy, like Season 8 where everyone is taking Aryan Scorch, you want to be able to do damage to another player without them being able to reciprocate. Because of that, Velkoz actually comes in at number 2. On top of the fact that Velkoz actually can build and itemize incredibly diversely, he's not limited to the same Rylai's Liandry's build that champion like Zyra is. Velkoz just has a lot of power in lane. Also, because they synergize well with the Dark Harvest, and the fact that you always want pushing lanes to just break off the turret plating, this champion just kind of seems to snowball and do everything really, really well. So, for rune setups, once again, we're going to be taking the Domination Tree with Dark Harvest, and the same scenario is going to probably happen where you're just choosing between Taste of Blood or Cheap Shot. For the most part, you're probably going to run Cheap Shot because unlike Zyra, you're going to have range advantage most of the situations. In this case, I would also probably recommend taking Eyeball Collector because it's just going to give you the most damage in lane. And then I'm a big fan still of the Relentless Hunter. I just like being able to move around the map and rotate and protect areas. So because I build things like Sorcerer Shoes on all of these champions, I'm going to be taking Relentless Hunter for the out of combat movement speed. But arguments can be made for other of the bottom tree. It's not a big deal. Then after that, once again, I'm going to be running Sorcery with Mana Flow Band and Absolute Focus, with the 2 both offense and flex being Adaptive Force again, the 10 Adaptive Force. And then once again, we're just looking at 5 armor or 6 magic resist based on my matchup and whether or not there's a mage DPSer in the lane. Now, since Velkoz doesn't have the same level of interactions with like Rylai's and Liandry's, we're not going to be building items like that, but instead you're going to get Sorcerer Shoes and actually Rush and Oblivion Orb. The reason for this is just Double Pen is really, really potent on this champion, and it allows you to snowball incredibly hard. On top of the fact that you don't have great ways to proc and keep procs on the Rylai's and Liandry's, like a dot or a plant, this just seems to be the best way to go about getting your build. After that, I've seen a bunch of very different kinds of builds based on your personal preference. A lot of people usually finish out the full Morel Anomicon since it's really stat efficient now that they've bumped the AP up. And then after that, the world's kind of your oyster. I'd probably get something like a Void Staff after that, just because it gives you flat percent, not bonus, like the armor pen items, so it stacks really well with your already built-in magic pen, so that would be the most recommended way. Then after that, it's kind of just whatever you want. Some people I've seen build items like Twin Shadows to scout out. Not a big fan of it, but it's something that I've definitely seen and work reasonably well. You can also build things like Death Cap and Zonias based on whether or not people are just focusing you. Really, the most important thing, though, is to try and get your hands on as much pen as fast as possible on this champion, just so you can front load a lot of damage. Alright, and then going into number 1 is going to be Brand. The reason why Brand is so potent right now is because of the fact of Dark Harvest being incredibly powerful and its combination with a lot of the interactions that Brand has. So, because Dark Harvest procs off of any damage at all in the game, your passive, which is a dot that ticks for damage, and the passive that explodes, count as ways to proc this. That means that in circumstances where you put someone to 50% health, your dot will always tick down and make sure that you guarantee Dark Harvest. On top of the fact that everyone's incredibly squishy right now, he seems to just blow people up and crush most of the lane matchups that he plays against. Another thing that he has advantage over something like maybe a Velkoz or a Zyra too is because all his spells do percent health damage, he actually handles tanks really, really well. And it's very hard to itemize against this champion because of how much power in the numbers that he has because of Dark Harvest. So, we'll jump right into the rune setup, and as I kind of alluded to, we're running Dark Harvest. And then it's between Cheap Shot and Taste Their Blood based on whether or not you're getting poked out a lot and need sustain, or Cheap Shot for extra damage. After that, we're going to be running Eyeball Collector and then Relentless Hunter once again. Once again, though, reminder that the bottom tree is mostly up to personal preference. I don't really think that one is better than the other. It's mostly based on your playstyle and what you value in terms of stats. And then after that, once again, we're going to be running Mana Flow Band and Absolute Focus, with your offense and flex being 10 Adaptive Force, and you're going to be running Armor or MR based on your matchup once again. So for the build path for a champion like Brand, you're going to be doing kind of the Zyra thing where you're going to get Liandry's, Rylai's, Void Staff. Your last item is just kind of whatever you want. Ludens isn't bad, Death Cap is pretty good too. It's just really important that you're getting the Rylai's and Liandry's as soon as possible, since this will also extend your dot duration, because the Liandry's has to wait till your final tick of your passive in order to start its ticking process like finisher. It's really easy for you to proc Dark Harvest, and pretty much everyone is just dying instantly. So on a lot of fights, especially if anyone's clumped up, it's really easy for you to just completely 1v9 Brand damage. Also, this champion is really good, even if you don't have any items. So that's why it kind of comes in at number 1. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not they continue to either tweak or nerf Dark Harvest, as it's already received a slight hotfix nerf. But even with that, it's still an incredibly powerful rune, and you should be running it in most of your solo queue games, because there's probably going to be a lot of fighting. And if you're fighting and killing each other a lot, it gives Dark Harvest the opportunity to stack and reset, which is incredibly powerful in the late game. Anyway, guys, if you've liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment in the section below. And I'll see you next time. Peace out. I'm Lohpally.